I've seen so many people when they realize their capacity for growth and change and impact, totally crush it. Like just do so many incredible things. And I know, and I've seen people come from the worst possible situation to and turn it around for good. I was just down in Dominican Republic, like literally a couple days ago with Live Different, and our community leader down there, Sandra, she was sharing her personal story, which she does to all of our teams. And she shared this moment that I'd never actually heard her say before, but the community she lived in was so poor and it would flood with water and it would flood with like sewage water. So the community was actually named Aguas Negras, which means black water. She has this moment where the flood waters would rise, rose in her home, and it came up to the edge of her bed. Do you remember sitting them on there with all of her kids, their arms wrapped around? She's praying to God for like something to happen. And there's this moment of just pure desperation. And with that, out of that cry of desperation, God started giving her like visions and dreams for like what she could do in the community and how she can make a difference. To go from that desperate of a moment, just completely like hopeless and just crying out of desperation, to now that entire community is completely transformed. And she's a beacon of hope and light, and education, and like professional development services, and pregnancy center, and a clinic, like all because of her. And so I just have seen that story coming from like desperation to like overcoming and redemption and triumph so many times. And when the people who can close the loop on the redemptive narrative and they can stand on top of the thing that should have defeated them as the tool they use to support and help others, like those are the people who make a difference. Those are the people who change the world.
Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Empowered Self podcast. So, it is a real pleasure and a real privilege for me to get to be here with Johnny Henderson. So, for those of you who don't know Johnny, Johnny is just an incredible person who does really amazing work on this planet. And he does so mainly through an organization known as Live Different. So, he's the director of the schools and community program at Live Different. And Live Different is a nonprofit Canadian charity which has sort of three main components to it. The first is the road team. So they actually have a basically group of young adults get into a truck and drive across the country delivering motivational speeches to kids all across Canada. It's incredibly beautiful. I got to be a part of that. And so this is how we got to know each other a little bit. The other thing that they do, which is really cool, is they do build. So they go to sort of lesser let's say less fortunate countries and less fortunate communities, and they go and bring a bunch of Canadian citizens who wouldn't otherwise have this opportunity to do this, and they go and build homes for people down there and get to connect with the families and meet them. So that's absolutely incredible. I'm sure they built hundreds if not thousands of homes for people all across the planet. And the other thing is they have a school for basically these girls in is it an African country?
No, it's actually in Haiti. In Haiti, we have a school that provides education for about 300 students, and then we have what's called a Freedom Village, which is a rescue home for girls kind of stuck in kind of like human trafficking industry in Haiti, which is primarily revolves around what's called a Restovex system. So we take girls from those in that system and help give them education, give them skills so that they can thrive. Yeah.
Amazing. I knew you would answer that better than I could. So yeah, thank you for sharing. But yeah, as you can see, Live Different is just such an incredible organization. And Johnny's been committed to this organization for quite a long time. So much so that he actually lived on the road for 3 years doing these tours across the country. So yeah, basically there's a lot of really amazing topics that we can get into regarding this and this whole story of how this started and, how this has continued to go on
Yeah.
after all these different years. So yeah, I know you're also a dad, and that's pretty incredible because bringing kids into this world is a really great gift, and also a big comedian. So, you're just really great at public speaking.
I don't know
But
about
anyway,
big. I wouldn't say big comedian.
yeah.
Aspiring, maybe like
Hmm.
struggling, fumbling
Yeah.
comedian.
You know what? All good titles. So, but yeah, really just thank you, Johnny, so much for being here. And basically, I want you to introduce yourself a little bit so people can sort of know who you are from
Yeah.
your perspective.
Yeah. So my name is actually John Michael Henderson the eighth. So that's a
Mm,
bit, it makes me seem like a little bit more of a big deal rather than John Henderson, which is the plainest, most boring, lamest name, whitest name of all time. And so add the eighth in there,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden I'm a little bit of royalty. And so my son's the ninth, and so he was born with a scepter in his hand, and so
Mm.
he's ready to rule. And so,
As all
um,
John should.
yeah, as all John should. That's what we say in our house. That's what we say. As
Yeah.
all John should. And
Uh,
so, yeah, the first John Henderson was 1747, which is true. True story. So, anyways,
wow.
that's something cool about me. Yeah, father of three, married 10 years, beautiful wife, beautiful family. We got 5, 3, and 7 months, so they keep me busy. Yeah, and then my life is consumed with all things live different. And then when I have time, I squeeze in comedy here and there. So yeah, that's pretty much me.
Mm. Yeah, cool. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you actually got started with Live Different, and what was your relationship to it from the very beginning?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, I'll give you the full scoop, the full story from my
I'm
perspective,
here
because
for
I've
it.
got my own perspective on how this all worked out. So I had some friends who went on a trip to Estonia of all places. And in
Okay.
Estonia, there was this DJ going into schools and doing these big events, and then he would break it down, and then he would like pause kind of in the middle of a set and do this big motivational speech just about how you can make a difference, and that you can be the one to change your environment, to change your story, that you could be the type of person to make a difference in the world, that your life matters. And so my friends went there and they saw this, and the branding that this guy was using in Estonian was "Live Differently." And
Oh
then they came
wow.
back and they were like, "We need to do this here," and so they changed the name to Live Different, and they started this initiative. And I was a part of some of those original vision casting meetings, and we were talking about getting this in schools across Canada, and how to activate young people and living beyond themselves, and investing in people, not in stuff. It's kind of the core message there. And so we did a bunch of different things over the years. Home renovations for local families. We're partnering with local, like the local Home Depot here, and like 40 young adults would come in over the weekends and totally renovate a house. And then everyone kind of moved on and moved into their different ventures in life, but I was still like super passionate about this Live Different thing. And I remember I was reading a book. It's by a guy named Francis Chan, called Crazy Love, and there's one chapter all about the brevity of life. And in that chapter, he poses a question like, if you had 6 months left to live, what would you do? And it was like, you couldn't do anything about it. Like, you were gonna die. Like, what's the thing that you would do? And I really did some like deep soul searching on this question, and I came up with the answer that I would go to as many students as I possibly could and tell them their life had purpose and they're not alone and they can make a difference. And so I was like, okay, if I truly believe that's what I would do, like, I need to start doing it. I need to do that. And so I began this crazy journey of trying to figure out what that would look like. And so talked to motivational speakers, talked to people who book motivational speakers. I talked to businesses and schools and teachers, and even built like a promo video. I was just trying to get this off the ground. A year after I started this journey, I sat in the office with this organization, which at the time was called Absolute Leadership Development. And we were just talking vision, and they were like, "How did you come up with this stuff?" And I talked about my experience living in Africa and serving and working with different communities there, and talked about my experience as a young person and like feeling so desperate and hopeless and finding this deep sense of purpose and belonging and meaning. And my heart for young people to find that for themselves. And they were just like, "You're telling us our vision. This is what we do." And we realized at that point it was just like a perfect fit. And so I came on board with Absolute and the first conversation we had after I accepted the position was, "What about Live Different? How do we utilize what you're doing?" And so that was when I actually came on at 23 years old, helped rebrand the organization, helped recast vision, and started making all of our own media content for our tours that traveled full time. And then I jumped on the road for 3 years, traveling with the teams and leading one of the teams there. And then, and so been involved, been in different roles, and now I'm in the director seat, since 2011. And so it's pretty cool journey. It's one of those things where it's like, I had this deep seated like conviction I couldn't shake that this needed to happen. And yeah, here I am 15 years later, and it's been incredible to be part of so much positive change in both in Canada and beyond. So
Hmm. Yeah. Wow. That's quite a story, you know? And I think what really stands out to me about Live Different is the fact that it is like, it started out in such a grassroots way. You know, like really there wasn't any sort of structure that enabled this to take place, and all of it was created from the ground up. And, you
yeah,
know, like that, I think it's really hard to state properly how difficult something like that actually is, and how long it actually takes, and like the
totally.
hurdles that you hope to have to overcome in order to allow something like this to take place. And like it's sort of hard to grasp the impact that this has actually had. But do you have any sort of estimates as to how many students have actually been impacted over the years?
Yeah, we're probably so just kind of overarching impact, like probably about 1.8 million students we've been in front of since
Mm-hmm.
2000,
Wow.
and built over 800 homes, and yeah, schools and clinics, and like I said, we have operations in Haiti every year that we're trying to support and fundraise, and so yeah, some pretty significant impact, and to kind of speak to the grassroots piece, it's like the actual origin story of Live Different. Like my story intersects with the organization, and the branding, the name, but the actual origin of it was a woman named Crystal, and her brother actually passed away in a farming accident, trying to save someone else's life, and then lost his life in the process. And then at his funeral, there was just like an insane, overwhelming amount of support and love, and she just had this like deep, soulful revelation of just like the power of one person's life. Like one person can make such a massive difference. And then it became her like deep conviction to like let every young person know that they matter, that their life matters, and they could be the one to make a change. And so her and then her then husband and her friends literally got into a VW van like and started traveling, and they're playing videos on a VHS like player, and they were doing music, and they were sharing their own personal stories, trying to motivate students. And then it started picking up momentum. They got more structure, started building programming around it. And in 2005, they kind of realized, we're activating these students in compassion. We're getting them to like want to do something, make a difference, but we personally don't have any opportunities to do that. So in 2005, they gathered together 120 youth and headed down to Dominican on their first build trip. And so
Mm-hmm.
so we've learned a lot since then. We've grown a lot since then, but the whole organization does come from that heart, that desire to kind of the equation. The way I look at it is there's a world that's hurting and in need. Like our kind of North Star organizationally is to alleviate suffering for the people in the most need. But on the other side of the equation is a generation of young people that are just hungry and desperate for purpose, right? And meaning. They want to be significant. They want to do something that matters. And so I can you marry those two worlds, like the need on both sides, and you end up solving each other's problems. You know what I mean? If you can activate young people in compassion and service, you can get them living beyond themselves. They can actually be the ones to alleviate the suffering for those in greatest need. And so that's kind of where we find ourselves, as a connecting tissue in that equation there.
Hmm. Yeah, and what I think is so cool about that is the fact that, you know, when we were in the training and you were training me to be one of these road team volunteers that would go across the country, I remember frequently there was this messaging that all of this is difficult, but if we impact even one person's life, all of it is worth it.
Totally.
So that just goes to show that this message from the very origin has stood throughout time, and it's still the main sort of fuel that's keeping this fire alive and keeping this momentum going to ignite hope and ignite passion within kids all across the country.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
the presentation that I got to be a part of was the power of possibility, and it basically was framed around the fact that like you do have the capacity in your life to make a difference, not only in your own life but to the people around you, and it happens from believing that it's possible.
Yeah,
right? So,
totally.
at least in my case, I remember going through many years of the Canadian education system, and we never had a live different presentation. And these things were not necessarily always touched upon, or they weren't, that awareness wasn't brought to this concept of empowerment and hope and purpose within kids. So the fact that now 1.8 million young people across Canada have this message because of this organization, to me, is just one of the most beautiful things ever. Like, it's so cool what you guys are doing, and all of this. But given that you have been a part of this organization for so long, can you talk a little bit about how you've seen things change, like the impact that you've seen in some of the students, and maybe some stories of real life examples of things that stand out to you throughout this journey?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, on the lighter side of things, we've matured a little bit. I think I like I think back to some of the things I did on tour, like just to make people laugh, like even in our presentation, or just like there's no meaning or purpose here. This is just for my own like self-indulgent entertainment. Like just so we did like
Mm.
just the most ridiculous things. And so we've grown up a bit. We focus a little bit more on like youth development outcomes and being very strategic with our messaging and how we accomplish our organizational goals. But yeah, I think the thing that's always from day one that's driven how we approach things is the use of personal story. And so you being one of our speakers, having shared your story, there's something about story that's so universal. Stories create a 3D space for other people to enter in. It kind of creates this empathic bridge between you and someone else. And so as our leaders and volunteers on tour share their stories, young people just see themselves in the story, right? And so I remember the first time I saw a Live Different presentation back in 2011. There's the girl on tour. I don't even remember her name, but I remember her story, and her story was seeing a Live Different presentation.
Mm.
And in the presentation, someone had shared the story where they carried a lot of guilt for something that wasn't their fault. And there was this kind of crescendo moment in the story where someone came to them and said, listen, it's not your fault. There's this watershed moment in their life where they were able to let go of their past and move forward. And this girl is sharing this story about hearing another person's story in the previous years or like a assembly. And then here she is, and her story was that her parents' house had burned down, like as a kid. And she for years carried this guilt, believing it was her fault because it was like a light that shorted out in her room or something. And so when that person was on stage and they were telling their story and saying like it's not your fault, like she had the same experience. She had this like opening up, this releasing of guilt, and so I remember, because I had at that time I was just checking out the organization and just getting to know it before I joined up, and that for me was like, oh yeah, I want to be a part of that change. And the cool thing is like those type of moments, yeah, I've seen them time and time again. And it's crazy because students don't have to necessarily have the exact same experience as you. I've talked about all my different struggles from, my own addiction journey, my dealing with my father's addiction, or my own personal kind of well-being and mental health experience, and feeling ostracized and outside, and experience that bullying and how that affected me and my kind of identity crisis, all these different things. And it doesn't matter what you share if you share it authentically. Students just universally resonate with it, and what they do is they see themselves in your story and they apply the lessons to their own life. And so as you walk through those maybe most difficult or hardest moments, and you learn those lessons as you're telling those story, you're walking through those moments, like the audience, the students are there with you, and they're walking that same journey. They're putting their feet in your shoes. And when you come to that revelatory point where you're realizing as you're sharing your story, like there was so much hope, there was so much purpose, there was so much meaning, things could be redeemed, I could tell myself a better story, there was so much possibility. Students are feeling that for themselves too. And so yeah, I've had the opportunity to circle back to schools I'd been to in the past and actually hear young people tell me all the ways in which their life had changed just because of, me sharing my story. And not everyone who comes on tour gets that experience because they don't stay on tour long enough. And so it's a very transient kind of experience. It's a hard life to live on the road, touring full time, 5 presentations a week, 5 different cities constantly all the time. And so, but I was fortunate enough to spend enough time on the road that I actually got to circle back and talk to a ton of those students. And so, and then they end up in our programs and you hear about them. My wife being one of them. My wife's life was completely changed at 12 years old. And so she has a lot of grace for the amount of travel I do and the work I support with Live Different because she's, the person she is today because of Live Different. So, there's an endless amount of those stories, but, it's really cool.
Mm. Yeah, and I think what really stands out to me about Live Different and my experience with it was like when we were on the road and going to many different schools and many different places, your face would come on screen and all the kids would yell, Johnny, Johnny. And that, like I had plenty of presentations when I was going through school, and I can't tell you any of these people's names or their faces off memory, right? And yet all of these kids, time and time again, would recognize this presentation and have vivid memories in their mind of it taking place. And that just really shows like how far this has come and how much careful cultivation has gone into the messaging and into how it's presented. Because you were talking earlier about like comedy and how, like sometimes you were doing things just to maybe, fulfill your own desire for entertainment. But in another deeper level, also, like when you enter into schools with comedy, it's almost like you create this element of trust immediately. Because, it shows that there's nothing bad or there's nothing wrong. Like you're
It's true.
happy, you're positive, you're focused on that. So these little details have made all the difference. And I think what drew me to the organization from the very beginning was the fact that it is sharing your own personal story. Because truly, like, even when you were just saying that now about the guilt thing, I immediately shot back to instances in my own life where I felt that same thing. And it was like, oh, what a relief. Like, I'm not the
Mhm.
only one who's felt this. So even just now, I'm still receiving healing from this concept of sharing stories to this day, even though I've heard countless stories from the road team volunteers. And, I've been a part of this for a long time. But it's all we can ever really do is share a personal story, right? Because one of the amazing things I learned from you during some of the training was if somebody has a nail in their head and you can see their problem very clearly, you telling them that they have a nail in their head isn't always going to solve the problem, right? Like it's one of the things that they have to come to their own conclusions on their own. And all we can do as empowered individuals is share ourselves and basically, help people to come to their own conclusions on their own. So yeah, when you enter into a school and you say, hey, let me give you advice. I know what's right. You know what's wrong. That doesn't seem to be the best way to go about it. But
Totally.
when you go in and you say, this is who I am, this is my journey, take what you will from it, it resonates at a whole different level.
Totally.
And I think that's one of the reasons why, even though this company has faced tons of difficulties and struggles, the source to which it's presented is so pure and good and wholesome that it keeps going on time and time again, even with all the things, all the barriers it faces to continue. Because I think most people know with a non-for-profit organization, like it is basically donation based, and there's a
Yeah.
lot of different things that you have to do in order to find financial support to do it. And that's a huge challenge, right? But with that being said, the next place I want to take this conversation is like, what motivates you to keep going? Given that, there are many challenges and you do have to travel a lot and you're away from your family. And, it's hard to be on the road for 5 months and
Yeah.
sleeping in different people's houses all the time. Like, how do you find motivation to keep going?
Yeah. To go back to what you're saying about kids recognizing me in schools and shouting my name and stuff like that. Really, my entire goal is to become the next Hal Johnson and Joanne McLeod. That body break
Okay.
level. I don't. I'm just kidding. Do you remember in like
I don't
the
know who those people are. That's the
oh,
problem.
dang.
Sorry.
I was really
Right
hoping you
over.
would. There was like in the
Uh,
90s, early 2000, there was Body Break with Hal Johnson and Joanne McLeod, and they would like come on and give you like a health tip and whatever. And so they're just iconic, but you didn't get it, so that's a miss. No, I
there will
think
be people who will.
there's people out there who will get it, and so I'm gonna be your next Hal Johnson. So, uh, um, no, but actually, in a serious way, I watched this documentary on Mr. Rogers, which is so and he was like a minister, and he had like his degree in like theology, and his kind of like whole life was his ministry in terms of like helping kids deal with difficult emotions and navigate life and be more kind and overcome their struggles, um and I actually so deeply resonated with that. I was like, oh, that is like, and he used his creativity and his like character to influence this like monumental kind of piece of, you know, media history, and kind of set the stage for cartoons or kids shows that had character driven content. Like, it didn't exist before him. And so on the legacy side of things, for me, like I want to do that. Like, I do want to have my legacy be one of that, like, leaves a ripple effect of you know, empowering young people. I always say, when you try to find your purpose in life, like the best way to find like deep purpose is to take the thing that makes you the most angry or frustrated about the world, and then marry that with something that you're just passionate about, that you love. And so hypothetically, you know, you're really frustrated with the pollution in the ocean, and you're really passionate about music. It's like, well, how do you create it? How do you marry those things? How do you do a festival for clean water? Like, do you produce an album and give all the proceeds to, you know, help ocean cleanup projects? So like, when you do those things, when you marry those two worlds, that's when you start to find real purpose. And so for me, the thing that makes me most like frustrated is when people don't understand the depth of their potential, when people squander that and they're just like, oh no, well, I can, or, and I've seen so many people, when they realize their capacity for growth and change and impact, just like totally crush it, like just do so many incredible things. And I know, and I've seen people come from the worst possible situation and turn it around for good. I'm going to give you just one example, just while I'm thinking about it. I was just down in Dominican Republic, like literally a couple days ago, with Live Different, and our community leader down there, Sandra, she was sharing her personal story, which she does to all of our teams that come through. And she shared this moment that I'd never actually heard her say before, but the community she lived in was so poor, and it would flood with water, and it would flood with like sewage water. So the community was actually named Aguas Negras, which means black water. And she says this moment with the flood waters would rose in her home, and it came up to the edge of her bed. And she remembers sitting then on there with all of her kids, with their arms wrapped around, and she's praying to God for like something to happen. And there's this moment of just pure desperation. And with that, out of that cry of desperation, God started giving her like visions and dreams for like what she could do in the community and how she can make a difference. And to go from that desperate of a moment, just completely like hopeless and just crying out of desperation, to now that entire community is completely transformed, like proper housing and electricity and paved roads, and like the flooding issues are fixed, and like she is this beacon of hope, and like she's literally like a Mother Teresa, and she's a beacon of hope and light and education and like professional development services and pregnancy center and a clinic, like all because of her. And so I just have seen that story coming from like desperation to like overcoming and redemption and triumph so many times, when people are in their narrative or their story arc, and they just lose sight of any potential, and they just are hopeless, like that just that gets me. So that's the thing that frustrates me most. And then the thing that I'm passionate about is I love creativity. I love like video, and I love like using art, and I love like storytelling and speaking. So all these things, I just marry those two, and that's obviously why you get me in the position that I'm doing what I'm doing. And so for me to like try to find the motivation to do what I do, like I honestly don't really have to. I don't feel like I'm constantly trying to, oh, you know, it's a grind, blah blah. It's like, it feels like it's just like an obvious, of course, yes. And so I don't know if I could ever walk away from that fully, because it's just a marriage of the things that I'm most I have a deep desire to fix, and the things that I'm most passionate about. And so,
Mhm.
and it's awesome. And I tell people that all the time. If they can find those two things and marry them together, man, life just becomes like just more full and rich. And
Mhm.
so, yeah,
Yeah. Wow. What an incredible story. And, thank you, because I think you are really succeeding in doing this and making a difference in the world. And yeah, it is one of those things where like it actually does make your life better, right? Like you can do
totally.
difficult things and that purpose will make you happier and healthier. So it's really one of those things that's a win-win scenario.
Yeah,
And I think a lot of what Live Different does is try and create symbiotic relationships between the people who are helping and those being helped,
yeah,
right? And I
exactly.
at least found this in my own case, like through the tour, I was able to gain all sorts of incredible skills and find this own empowerment in myself. And honestly, like this podcast wouldn't have been created if it wasn't for my experience with Live Different
Oh,
and
that's
really
great.
seeing how you functioned, right? Because, I remember we were shooting videos, we were shooting this story videos at the end of the year, and you had this whole setup in a garage. And I'm like, oh, like you can do this? Like you can be an individual filming on your own with your own skill set. And I was like, okay, now I'm going to start doing that myself. Right. And
Oh,
I've
that's
had all
cool.
these incredible, basically like this is why I share these videos on Instagram now. Like I gained this self starting ability just based off my own desire to make a change in this world, having seen that it's possible from people like you already doing it. Right.
Mm,
So, yeah, thank you because
love
you've
that.
helped motivate me to continue to do this sort of thing.
Oh,
But
thanks.
I think there's just so many interesting things that we could get into with this whole thing. But a question I want to ask now is like, given that you have traveled around Canada for 3 years on the road, like I lived my entire life up until what, 26 years old, having only been to Ontario and Quebec, right? I hadn't even seen my country or like seen the people. So like what's one like fact about Canadians or about Canadian lives or about schools across Canada that you've seen that maybe the average Canadian doesn't know because they haven't had exposure to it?
Well, I mean, if you're the average, statistically, if you're the average Canadian, you probably live in like the greater Vancouver, so like lower mainland BC, or you live in like the Golden Horseshoe in Ontario. The
Mm-hmm.
reality is that like the rest of Canada is very rural. And so
Mm-hmm.
when you say you're going to the town, you go into the city, you're driving 45 minutes, and the city is a place that's, 30,000 people. And so, whereas like where I am in Ontario, I'm in Niagara, like it's, 30,000 people is the small town. It's not a city at all. And so your just perspective just completely shifts on like, yeah, what Canada really is. Canada's very, very rural place in most places. And so it's very sparsely populated. And so, I found that was very eye opening to me because I grew up in Niagara and spent all my time in the Golden Horseshoe here. So from Toronto down through to maybe Windsor, but it's not representative of the country as a whole, that's for sure.
Yeah, at least having traveled to all these places really gave me a different perspective on the country, and I also got to see like how similar so many Canadians are, right? And like I think a lot of the media sometimes pushes like basically what's the proper term for it? Like separation between people, or
Right.
as if these are your differences between them. But having met all these incredible Canadians who were literally willing to take us into their homes, like, feed us and shelter us as we're doing this, like it really just showed me how beautiful and amazing people actually are. And I think like when you have these screens and these barriers that are preventing that real in-person connection, you don't always see the magnificence of human beings. But when you actually get to be there with Canadians, you see just how incredible Canadians actually are. So I just want to take a second and like, honor and appreciate all the different people throughout the years who have supported this organization. Because it's not just those who are actually involved in the day-to-day like jobs, but it's all the people who have collectively come together to support this mission.
Yeah, yeah, we have our staffs all over the country, but we have so many pockets of people all over the country that support what we do, whether it's through hosting our teams, through billeting, and coming on our trips and traveling with us to Dominican or Mexico or supporting Haiti. And so from coast to coast, yeah, there's incredible people all over this country, making Live Different happen. And so definitely takes an army to pull off what we pull off.
Cool. Yeah. And another thing I wanted to say that's super interesting about Live Different is like the Ice Roads tour.
Yeah.
right? So for people who don't know what this is, it's actually kind of crazy. So the team takes like a big 5-person box truck and they drive out on ice roads, sometimes hours and hours and hours at a time, to get to like the most rural areas in the entire country to help these indigenous communities that really don't have access to regular resources because there aren't really roads to actually even get out there. So just imagine like, you living with a group of 5 people out of a truck, like for even a month at a time in the cold dead of winter in the middle of rural Manitoba, going to deliver speeches of hope and purpose to these indigenous people. So can you sort of tell us a little bit maybe about how that whole thing started and what's the real motivation for wanting to help the indigenous of this country so much?
Yeah. So, circle back to 2017. Um, we kind of just started our own journey of like truth and reconciliation. As a like a white led organization. And it really just spurs out of the same thing that spurs all of our programming, which is just like to meet the need. And so the reality is the suicide crisis in indigenous communities, especially isolated ones, is 7 times the national average. And unfortunately, on a global stage, Canada doesn't stack up very well in general. And so it's like a UN identified humanitarian crisis. So we just knew we needed to start we'd always worked with indigenous communities, but we just needed to like really commit to what that could look like. And so we started working kind of in conversation with the former Grand Chief of MKO in Manitoba, and Sheila North, who's now on our board and longtime supporter now. She kind of introduced us to some of the communities. There was a big survey done around that time with youth in terms of like what they needed and what they were asking for. And a lot of what we were delivering programming wise met those needs. So they were really excited about partnering with us.
Nice.
And so, yeah, so that year, Sheila's daughter, actually, Trisha, came on and helped lead the team up there. And yeah, we went into the unknown a little bit and started delivering this message of hope. And one of the ways that we've evolved and matured is that we used to have like an indigenous program, and what we've done instead was just kind of evolved out of that into more of like trying to incorporate indigenous wisdom into our practice. And so our youth programming is called Circles, and Circles actually comes from the ancient tradition of sharing circles or talking circles. And it's this idea of like you create a space where everyone has equal opportunity to speak, everyone has wisdom to offer and learn, and you create this like kind of equitable space where everyone gets to share, everyone gets to be heard and feel important, and so we realize how effective that was as a kind of a tool to use to accomplish our goals organizationally. And so we just started, instead of just like, oh, let's have a different program that offers these things to indigenous communities that kind of that checks their cultural box. We decided to like, no, like we just need to be integrating this brilliant wisdom into our organization as a whole. So, I mean, you talked about symbiotic relationships. It's actually true. Like our development model, especially with our international work, is symbiotic philanthropy. It's this idea that like there's no one in a power seat. We're not like, we work with local community leaders and local contractors, and local community leaders are the ones making the decision. They're the ones who know the best. We let them take the lead, and it's similar to how we operate with indigenous communities. And so we always have indigenous representation on our teams. It's important for us. But we partner with the communities. We're not coming in there and telling them what to do and how to do it. And so we really work with the communities, work alongside them. And we ended up gaining so much in the process. I was just up there a couple of weeks, we guess being of February, and I just walk away with like my cup being filled, because the hospitality and the kindness and the connections. Like I just, sat with an elder in the hallway and just chatted with him for like a half hour. And he was just like so kind and asked me so many good questions, and we got to hear about his life, and just had this, and there's so much of that in the North and in these communities. And we have a lot to learn from them, And so I think what we do is important, and I think that our message is important and valuable, and youth resonate with it. But at the same time, we come in with open hearts, and we learn and gain so much from these communities as well. So it's just a beautiful relationship. It goes both ways, and continue to hope to grow that relationship and those connections. And so it's been a journey of building trust, and I think we have that now. Like, we have a lot of people who back what we do and believe in it. And so we keep coming back every year, which really makes a difference, because it's not just oh, this is a cool novelty program. It's like, no, it's like we're committed to this. And so we've started to build that trust. And so, yeah, it's a lot of momentum there with the work that we've been doing in the North, and look forward to see how it continues to grow in the future. And so this last June, we had a trip, 3 different Cree nations in northern Manitoba that are all isolated, very remote, join us in Dominican Republic on a build. So there was like 20 youth and leaders from these communities that come all the way down to Dominican Republic. Most of them had to get their passport for the trip, had never flown, some of them had never left their community before, and had a life-changing experience in Dominican, building a home for a lovely man named Santo. And it was a completely life-changing experience for a lot of them. And we're doing another one of those in Mexico as well. I think there's 4 or 5 communities involved in this one. And so, yeah, it's just so many cool opportunities that we get to be part of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's really quite extraordinary, what's taken place and what you guys have been able to accomplish with, the limited resources that you have and everything. But like, is there any sort of vision for the future? Like, where is Live Different going? And let's say that a bunch of people do come together and start supporting in a bigger way. What would be the dream be for Live Different moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, so COVID was caused a lot of problems for a lot of people, and so us being one of them. And so would love to get it back up to the momentum where we were pre-COVID, have like 3 teams touring full time. But then beyond that, I think we need to look at program expansion. We have our peer mentorship curriculum that we use and implement in schools, and our tours. But I would love to see us diversify our programs and just be open to because the North Star organizationally for us is to activate young people in compassion and service. We believe that the keystone developmental marker that makes the biggest difference is, how do you get a young person to see beyond themselves, to live beyond themselves, to find that sense of purpose. And so, within that, you need to do work on resilience and identity formation, and cultivating relationships that support that identity, that are meaningful, and and then opportunities to give back. And so but ultimately, that's our goal, is to activate students. And so it doesn't need to be a tour. It doesn't need to be, motivational speakers. Although I think that's our intervention works really well and is effective and important. But there are other ways to accomplish that goal. And so, yeah, I'd love to see what other kind of programming models that we could come up with to diversify how we execute our organizational mandate.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. And so is there anywhere else that you'd like to, anything about Live Different that you think the viewer should know, or any sort of places that we haven't covered yet that maybe would be good to discuss?
Yeah, the only other program, if we want to talk programs that you didn't mention, was Academy. We have a gap year program where young adults, post-secondary students can come down, live with us in Mexico, volunteer locally in the community, live in Dominican for a little bit, get to experience our programs there and volunteer. It's a very profound, life-changing opportunity to explore leadership, to learn about poverty and the international development and the global realities, but also like grow yourself, figure out who you are, what you're about, what matters. And so, yeah, that's the only thing programming wise. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we're just a bunch of people with big hearts trying to make a difference. And so we're committed to that. And so, yeah, very fortunate to be a part of this mission in Canada.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I'm incredibly grateful for the role that I've gotten to play, and the little role that I played on the road. And I'll be a supporter of Live Different for life. So much so, I have a little Live Different tattoo here now. I don't
I
know if
did
you've seen
not
that,
know
Johnny,
that.
but yeah, I
What?
got it when I was down in Costa Rica a
My
couple months
goodness.
ago. But yeah, that's
You're
how much
making
I
us
love this
the amount of
organization.
tattoos we have for Live Different, like the amount of heart tattoos we have, like people think we're a cult, and so it's a little
You
bit
know
so
what?
so
It's
you're
not the first
propagating
cult I've joined, so
you're propagating the cult narrative, and so no, I
yeah.
promise we're not. I promise we're not.
If
And
ever there was a cult to support, this would be the one to support.
yeah, right. Until we tell you to
Yeah.
drink the Kool-Aid.
Yeah, exactly. If we weren't working with kids, it would be a different story. But
Yeah.
let's keep the cult allegations to a minimum.
Yeah, let's keep the
Yeah.
cult allegations to a minimum. No, but it's cool. It does
Uh,
it does speak to the depth of um impact and life change that people experience working with us, and what it represents to them. And so yeah, you are a part of an army of people out there. Hopefully one
mhm.
day you run into somebody else who has a tattoo and you're like, ah.
Hey. Well, I think Michaela actually got a tattoo as well, and so she's
Oh, I didn't know
once I
that.
see her again.
That's
So
cool.
Michaela is one of the road members that I got to live with. So when we
Love
were
that.
out there, yeah. But no, I really do strongly believe in the actual like name of the brand too, like Live Differently. I've found so much value in my own life personally from walking the lesser walked path, right? And I really think that there is a lot of incredible value in doing that. And I think like at least when it comes to this opportunity, if anyone out there is listening who maybe wants to come on the road, I would strongly recommend it, or going to the academy or doing a build. Because there are so many people who all go to post-secondary and they all get the
Mm.
same bachelor's degree. And if you're all sort of collecting the same wisdom, then there's like it's fantastic that everybody's doing so. But when you can have somebody who walks a different path, gaining a different perspective, and you add that into the mix, all of a sudden you're sort of changing the dynamic of that information, right? So
Totally.
really there is a lot of value in, if you want to be somebody who can make a difference, who can be a good family member and a good role model in your community, one of the ways to do so is become empowered within yourself. And one of the ways to do that is through walking a different path, following your heart, following your purpose. Because again, Live Different would not have been here if it wasn't for somebody going into the unknown and creating something that wasn't already there. Right. So,
Yeah.
yeah, you remember,
No.
everyone, you have the capacity to do amazing things. And all it takes is you taking that first step and trusting in your internal guidance to get you through. So,
It's true. Yeah, we've got a very strong culturally prescribed narrative of how you're supposed to operate and what are the stepping stones in life, and unfortunately there's a lot missing in that equation. And so
mhm.
it's funny, I was talking to somebody literally yesterday about this idea that um one of my favorite things to share, I often share this a lot, is the keystone indicator of success regardless of industry is not anything to do with intellect or knowledge. It has to do with emotional regulation.
Oh,
When
wow.
things get tough and difficult and you're in a conflict, can you keep a cool head? Can you know how to like find your center and and deal with things in a way that's productive and helpful rather than harmful and destructive? And so if that's the keystone of success and like well-being, then like why are we not teaching it in schools? Like why is this not something, a conversation that we're talking about all the time? The strategies and the tips, the tricks and the research kind of methodologies and how to, become a more regulated person, has control, is master of their domain, and can keep extreme emotions to a minimum in order to you know operate in the world in an effective kind of helpful manner. And so it just goes to show you that like well, everyone can get their MBA, but if you don't know how to like be kind when you're frustrated, then it's like it doesn't mean much. And so yeah, and I think our programs, I mean, the road is actually a very good place to practice some of those things. And so
Mhm.
when you're living full time with a bunch of other people, you're in each other's business 24/7, and so it's gonna test your character, because sometimes when you run out of options about like, how do you fix this, or how does this become better, or how does this become successful, you have to look inward. Like you can't like you and tour does that. Tour traveling with different, it does that, makes you look inward, because you're forced to become a better version of yourself in order for it to thrive, in order for you to succeed. And so yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and it reminds me of the messaging from this last year, which was all about like what really matters, right? And it's like finding that focal point within you of determining like, is it the amount of likes you get, or is it the amount of money in your bank account, or is it the real honest friend connections that you have? And
Totally.
only in each individual can determine that for themselves. What does really matter for them, and you get the choice with your own actions and free will whether where you put your focus and your direction towards.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah,
Mm,
absolutely. Yeah, I love the different messages we get to share. Next year we're gonna be sharing a message as kindness changes everything. And it's
mm,
an exploration of like altruism. And so, how do we change our perspective so that, I see you as not a separate person but an extension of myself. There's this idea that, psychologists, some social psychologists would say like individual is not actually accurate because we're so heavily influenced by the people and the relationships around us. It's actually more accurate to describe ourselves as an interdividual, like one piece of a larger whole. And when you really like internalize that and you adopt that identity, like when you win, I win, when you lose, I lose, like we're in this together, then that's when people truly become altruistic, right? Because they're seeing themselves in the other. And that's kind of the crux of the message that we want to bring into schools next year, kind of branded under this idea of kindness changes everything. And yeah, how do you gain a perspective of unity and oneness in with your how you look at others, and how can that influence you to care and have concern and love and support for others. And so yeah, it's just a message like that, like you can't go wrong, like it's
mhm.
like. And so it's just awesome that we get to share these really really positive amazing messages with young people.
Yeah. And I just want to say too, like, having gotten to go and share this story with kids myself, like, my journey was one of tremendous difficulty, and I was very alone and secluded and had this incredible amount of depression and anxiety. And luckily, I was able to sort of overcome some of these things myself. But the whole goal of me going on this journey of self discovery that I've been going on for many, many years was always how can I help other people get through that same thing? How can I
Mm-hmm.
make it easier on them what was so hard for me in the
Yeah.
beginning? And so I went on this long journey to like cultivate myself into somebody who can be a role model for others. And my goal from the very beginning was to share this message with young Canadians, right? And here comes Live Different, a charity that literally has a little post on Kijiji or whatever it was. I forget what the job posting was. It was Indeed. I remember we had a long
Indeed. Yeah.
running joke about the Indeed post. But anyway, it's like, yeah, be a Canadian, sharing your Canadian stories with other Canadians. I couldn't click on that posting fast enough. And really, it was like this full circle moment. It was such an incredible dream come true for me to get to share my story to kids all across Canada and have kids come up to me and say, John, like, I'm actually going to quit these things because you were able to quit that thing yourself.
Mm.
Or like, I'm been feeling this depression too. Thank you for helping me not feel alone. So yeah, I mean, Live Different really did help me fulfill my dreams, and I just have such a full heart thanks to that whole experience that I got to go on, thanks to you and all those incredible people.
I,
So I really just want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to live out my dreams and get to
uh,
make a difference in this world in an impactful and meaningful way. And I just want to ask you now, like, what advice would you have for young people who are still maybe struggling to find their purpose and they don't quite know what it is yet? But how could you help them find that purpose?
yeah, for sure. Well, first off, thank you. I appreciate
Hmm.
that. It's very kind of you. And yeah, and it's awesome when we get to cross paths with people kind of at that point in their journey where they're ready and they're wanting to give back and they're wanting to um, close the loop on the redemptive cycle. And so
Hmm.
I always say redemption is when someone is able to use the thing that was meant to destroy them as the platform they stand on to help others. And so, and I think that's like, oh, that's such like a pervading archetype through all human history. And when the people who can close the loop on the redemptive narrative and they can stand on top of the thing that should have defeated them as the tool they use to support and help others, like those are the people who make a difference. Those are the people who change the world. And so it's cool that you got to step in with Live Different and to close that loop for yourself and to harness those difficulties and those hard moments for good, and to help others through their kind of own personal struggles because of that. And so I love that. Um, yeah, I think for people who are struggling and they're missing that, yeah, there's a, I think one is like, we talked about the power of possibility being a theme, but I think opening yourself up to the idea that things can change. I think that's when you're feeling like really desperate and hopeless, like the possibility of possibility doesn't feel like it's an option. You know what I mean? Like the world is just closed in. And so I think sometimes it's just finding that belief and rekindling that belief that, okay, like maybe things can change. And so, you know, hope is the kind of light at the end of the tunnel. It's that thing when all else is lost, there's that shimmering piece of something that tells you like things will get better. One of the things I've shared before, even in some keynotes, is this idea, like one of the things that lessons I've learned along the way of my journey is that, feelings aren't forever. And so sometimes I've gone through, like, I remember one year, my young adults, where it's like, I was so anxious. Like every morning I'd wake up and I'd throw up. And like I just was in such a bad spot, this loop of anxiety. And and I came out on the other side of it. And finally, when I felt the reprieve from those feelings, and started to find strategies and find ways to minimize that and to navigate that, I had this deep, like, revelatory kind of lesson learned, which was, feelings aren't forever. Like, oh, it doesn't have to be that way forever. And so I think sometimes just letting that truth seep in just opens the door to so much. And so, yeah. So I think that's always the starting place. And then, we've talked a lot about, marrying the things that make you angry the world with something you're passionate about, or closing that redemptive loop by, harnessing the things that the hurts in your life to support others. And so there are a lot of different ways to look at it, but yeah, let hope in is definitely the starting place.
Yeah. And, just based off your response to that, I can tell that hope is the medicine that you know how to serve well because of your relationship to this company for so many different years. And, I think when you're in that dark place, a lot of times it can feel like sort of a rut, right? Like a lot of people will relate this to like a snow hill where you keep going down the same path and it gets deeper and deeper and you don't even believe that you can get out of it. But what Live Different is to me in a lot of ways is that fresh snowfall that gives you an opportunity to get out of that rut, and it shows you that if change is possible for them, it's possible for me too. And there are plenty of kids out there in Canada right now who are in those dark places, and they do need a little bit of hope and they need a little light at the end of the tunnel. And just that is sometimes enough to save people's life and to change their life completely. So yeah, it's just so incredible what Live Different is doing. I could go on and on about this because I love it so much. But if people want to know more about it or reach out and get involved, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, if you want to reach out to me personally, you can. It's simple, Johnny@livedifferent.com. So you can also go to our website, livedifferent.com. You can find out our programs there. You can reach out to us. So we also are on Instagram and TikTok and all those things @LiveDiff. And so follow along and see what we're up to as well. Send us a DM if you have any questions. And so, yeah, again, it's behind the scenes. It's just a bunch of good-hearted people. And so we'd love to chat. If you have any questions, we'd love to answer them.
Okay, yeah, I'll put all the details in the description and stuff like that. And if anybody is interested, you can always reach out to me, and I can connect people. But yeah, so I just want to cover a couple other topics briefly before we wrap things down here. But so you are a new father. I don't want to say new. You have 3 kids, but relatively, right? And so I just want to ask you, like, how has bringing a child into the world changed you as a person, and what benefit have you seen from this whole process of becoming a parent?
Yeah, I think parenting is actually just an exercise in self-sacrifice. And so I say, like, you're no longer number one. You're always number two. Even when you're going number two, like, you just don't get any free time. Like, your life is constantly filled with kids. And so, but I think that exercise of, like, because when your life is totally wrapped up in you and it's you, me, you know what I mean? Like you have that mentality, like it does start to feel, starts to feel a little, it can, I not say it has to, but it can feel very empty. And so mainly if essentially if you're connected, you're not connected to a larger sense of self. If you don't have that driving purpose, you don't have the thing you're trying to solve in the world, or your place that your community, your people, like you're not connected. And so I just think that like parenting, what has taught me is that like a life lived for others is a life well spent. And so
Amen.
and so that's just like an exercise in that. And so I love my kids dearly. I remember when we found out we are gonna have a third, I was pretty disappointed. I hate to say it.
It's the only
And,
appropriate response.
and so it took me a minute. I mean, I didn't tell my wife how much I was struggling, but yeah, there was this moment where when she was pregnant, we couldn't find a heartbeat, and so we had an emergency ultrasound. And I remember I had to drop her off, and then I had to pick up my oldest because he was sick at school, and we were waiting for my wife to be done, and she texted me like everything's okay. And I remember I just started weeping, like just sobbing, and I realized how grateful I was. And so because I realized that even that like disappointment was coming from my own selfishness, you know, I just didn't want to give up more. I didn't want to give up more comfort and more the simplicity. I and then when I realized I was grateful, oh my gosh, like my heart became lighter and life became easier. And yeah, so I think, yeah, I've learned to approach everything with gratitude. Like, oh, one of the things that's radically changed my life, and it's something from like a reel on Instagram or something. It profoundly has changed my life. It was somebody was saying that when you're having these moments of like frustration and discontent with kids, like with your children, because it can be a lot. It's just all encompassing. Imagine for a moment, there's this thought exercise where you're 85 years old and you're on your deathbed. And for some magical reason, you get transported back to this moment as a gift. How do you feel? And so sometimes, you know, you're doing something and you're busy and you're trying to get a project done, and your kid comes up to you and asks you a silly question you just don't have the patience for, and they want to get frustrated. I literally imagine myself being 85 years old and getting back to this moment. The kid tugging on my pant leg, and I'm just grateful. And I pause and I pick them up and I give them the time. And it just helps frame this whole thing as just a big gift. And so, at the end of the day, you're not going to regret a child. You never regret your children. And so, and when you survey your life, when you look back on the things that were worthwhile, like they're going to be at the top of the list. And so, yeah, so kids have just broadened my perspective of what's really important, what matters in life.
Wow. Johnny, I really honor your authenticity and your vulnerability and your honesty. So thank you for that incredible answer. And I think a lot of people will really resonate and, you know, connect with that. So thank you for sharing. And I basically, you know, I would just, maybe we can do this again sometime and get into some other topics as well, because I'd love to keep this conversation going. It's been so nice to sit down with you and do this. But a question I like to ask at the end is sort of like, what is alive in your heart at this moment?
I think humility. I think like, I think like gratitude and humility are like partners. And so, yeah, I recognize how fortunate I am. My life and my family and my wife, and my work, and the fact that I get to do such good soulful heart work for like my day to day. And so I'm just humbled by that. I'm grateful for that. And yeah, it doesn't, yeah, I don't want to miss that. And so
Mm,
sometimes you can just get caught up in, the discomforts or the inconveniences of life. And I just, yeah, what I'm really trying to practice now is just that awareness and gratitude for this life that I get to have. And yeah, pretty fortunate.
mm. Wow. And I'm a big believer in leading by example and leading through your own actions. And for those who are maybe struggling to find their purpose, let Johnny be a motivator for you to show you how grateful you could be for your life when you get to this point, right?
Mm,
Even on those sleepless nights and the difficulty, look at, I think I'm super happy with my life and you're super happy with your life. So you're just a really great role model and an example of giving people reason to follow their purpose.
mm,
So yeah, just thank you so much, Johnny, for this conversation and for everything that you've done for me in Canada and just young people and the world in general. Thank you so much for all that you've done and for all that you continue to do with every day that you have on this planet to make the world a better place. So yeah, brother, I love you. I love
mm.
all that you're doing. So thank you so much.
Thanks, John. Appreciate you,
And
buddy.
yeah, I'll just open it up and say, is there any final sentiment that you want to share, or any final message that you'd like to say?
No,
Anything that you feel called?
I love the journey that you're on, and I love that you're taking time, to create content and to create conversations that support people and have people at the center. And so I think the world just needs more of that. So I'm cheering you on in your journey as you strive to empower people to be the best versions of themselves. So thanks for what you do.
Amazing. Thank you. And for the viewers at home, don't forget to live differently. You won't regret it. And go to Estonia too, because apparently that's a pretty cool place. All right, viewers. We'll see you in the next episode, and yeah, I'll have all the details to live different and Johnny in the caption or whatever it's called, the description, so you can find all that. But thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the next episode. Bye bye.